All right, thanks everyone for joining our Dynamics GP year-end webinar. My name is Drew Colo, and I am a senior marketing consultant here at Savannas. Before we get started and I hand it off to Janelle, I just wanted to note a few things. So this webinar will be recorded, and everyone who has registered for the webinar will receive a webinar recording sent to their email address in the next day or two. Our Dynamics GP team will be monitoring the questions tab throughout the presentation. So if you have a question, as Janelle talks, feel free to drop it in there. Janelle will also be doing a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So if you want to ask Janelle something related to the year end, feel free to drop it in the questions tab as well, and we'll make sure Janelle answers it at the end. So with that, I'd like to introduce Janelle Riley. Janelle is the CEO of Savannas, CPA with over 20 years of experience in Dynamics GP. So Janelle, I'll hand it off to you now to get started.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Drew. So today we're going to go through our annual year-end closing procedures webinar. After this, you will also receive documentation from us of step-by-step instructions of how to close the year in Dynamics GP. Many of you have heard this multiple times, but I hear from our clients that they find it helpful, unlike our consultants who do year-end close all year because we have many fiscal year clients. Many of you only do year-end closing procedures once a year, so it's hard to remember what the process is. So I'm going to go through the details of that, and then also keep in mind that many of our clients, frankly, I would say most of our clients, just do a couple hours session with their lead consultant on their account and just walk through the closing procedures together. And then that way kind of takes the stress off. They don't have to worry about it. So keep in mind, you always have that option as well. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, what we're going to do is talk about year-end update releases. Then we're going to talk about when you close. Then best practices for preparing to close. Then year-end closing procedures by module. Then we're going to do some year-end frequently asked questions. And at the end, we'll open it up for Q&A as well. So first of all, for the year-end update, those have been released by Microsoft. They usually come out in November, and we do have those available now. If you are a Savannas GP Cloud customer and you have GP on Azure, you get all those updates for free. So if you're an on-premise GP customer, then we can install it for you, but there is a fee for that. So there is going to be an email that you're going to get to schedule the updates. I believe I saw a draft of that this morning, so Drew should get that out to you pretty soon, so that you can schedule those updates. And then, as I mentioned before, we will send year-end closing instructions to all of the attendees of the webinar. So this year, the IRS did make edits again to the NEC and miscellaneous forms. So what does that mean? If you have a 1099 miscellaneous, you need 1099 miscellaneous is you need to file the NECs, 1099 div, 1099R, of course, if you're payroll, and 1095C for payroll. If you're filing any of those forms this year, you do need to have the year-end update installed. One of the nice things is if you are using payroll and you only need the W2, W3, or W4, there are no changes to that, so you don't need to worry about it. Another thing to keep in mind is that this update is inclusive of 18.2, 18.3, 18.4. What that means is when you get this update, if you're on version 18 of Dynamics GP, you will be 100% up to date once this service pack has been applied. One important thing to know is if you are on GP 2016 or earlier, you cannot get the update because you're no longer supported by Microsoft. You must be on GP 2018 and later versions in order to receive the update. If you can't receive the update because you are not on the current version of GP, there are many 1099 form providers that you could actually, extract the data out of GP and then manually put those into those forms. So when do you close? First of all, let's talk about entering transactions into 2022. So let's just imagine it's January 2nd, 2022, and we're trying to figure out what to do next. So when is the best time to close GP? As soon as possible after year end. I cannot emphasize this enough. And every year, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have some client that comes back to me and says, and it's like February, and they're like, well, we haven't closed the GL yet. I'm like, what? Why? You should have the GL closed usually within 5 to 7 business days after the end of the fiscal year. And if that means if you're a calendar year company, you should have it closed between about January 4th and January 8th. And I would say the vast majority of our clients have GP closed within that period of time. So, can I enter transactions into 2022 before I close 2021? Loaded question. Microsoft recommends that you enter all transactions for 2022 into batches before you close 2021, but then just don't post the batches until you've closed 2021. So you would go ahead and put all those transactions in, but you're just not going to post them. We do occasionally have clients who go, oh, we're not going to enter anything into the system until we've closed. That's not how you do it. You still have to put them into batches because you should not slow down your operations for year-end close. So to avoid having to post your AP batches between January 1st and close, what I do recommend is enter all your outstanding vendor invoices for the month of December by December 31st, so that all of those are in there and you're not in a hurry to have to write checks. Payroll can be run, but not posted until after your close. And that one is actually true. That one is not negotiable. The other one, which I'm going to hit, is fixed assets. You cannot run depreciation into the new year until you have closed the old year. That's very important. So what happened if I don't close before I post in the new year? Well, there are some reports and inquiry windows like vendor yearly summary, customer summary inquiry, some inventory reports that are not going to be accurate. That being true, so rare that our customers actually use those particular windows. They actually typically don't use these windows or reports anyway. So in a nutshell, running year-end close before you post transactions into 2022 is actually not critical. But occasionally someone might pull up one of these inquiry windows and go, what? And be super confused, right? But other than that, it's actually not going to do any harm to enter transactions into 2022 before you close 2021. So what if I don't have solid numbers quick enough? So here's the trick that people do is the order for closing GP of each of the modules actually mirrors how you normally close your month-end close, right? Normally, what do? You go ahead, you get all of your sales invoices out, you get all your purchase invoices in. That's one of the first things that you do. So at that point, once all those are in, you can actually close inventory, you can close payables, and you can close receivables. So you can do it in that order as you complete each of those processes. So our clients frequently will get all sales invoices in and all purchase invoices that impact inventory, then they'll close inventory. Then they'll go ahead at that point, receivables, they can actually close that. Then what they'll do is they'll bring in their payables, the last payables transactions for 2021, they'll close that. Then they'll go through fixed assets, project accounting, and then lastly, general ledger. The main thing with general ledger is don't wait to have all your final GL adjustments. Again, I say this every single year, and certain people don't listen to me, and it's just not right. You do have to close GL as soon as possible. So I'll hit that in the next slide. So what if I have to do an audit? I always hear that. Close the GL anyway. It will roll forward your balance sheet balances. It will put your checkbook into balance with what's in the GL. It's just audits have no impact on year end. So the reason is GP handles post-closing adjustments really well. When you go ahead and you have, let's say I have a transaction, let's say I have an accrual, right, for an expense accrual. So what do? I go ahead and debit the expense and credit some sort of accrual liability account, right? When I do that at the end of the year, after I've closed the year, what happens is it'll go ahead and debit the expense, credit the liability, then it'll go in immediately and debit retained earnings and credit the expense. So it'll do 2 entries simultaneously that close it all to retained earnings perfectly. So long story short, close the GL, even if you have an audit outstanding, because it has no impact at all on your year-end close. So what are my best practices for preparing for close? Well, first of all, one of the first things you want to do is order 1099s and W-2s. Then you'll complete your balance sheet close. Then you'll complete your month-end routines, and then you'll run check links. That is the best process to follow before close. First of all, order 1099s and W-2s. The preferred provider of Microsoft Dynamics is Deluxe Forms, is Deluxe Corporation at deluxe.com. So you can find the forms there. You could also email Kari Stockston, kari.stockston@savannas.com for additional instructions. She's actually our controller. She actually purchases our forms, so she can tell you, which form numbers we typically purchase, so you have some recommendations. The next thing you'll want to do is perform your normal month-end balance sheet close. It should happen every single month end. I always remind people the balance sheet is more important than the P&L, right? The main thing that you'll want to do is make sure every single asset account, every single liability account has details supporting that balance. And again, just to remind people, a lot of people don't get the concept of this, but what a balance sheet close does is make sure that your financials are right. We all know the formula: assets equals liabilities plus prior retained earnings plus current year income. That is the formula we use, right, for all accounting, right? So if I can go through my entire balance sheet and I can validate that every single one of my asset accounts is absolutely correct, and I've supported it with supporting documentation, if I can prove that my liabilities are perfectly correct with supporting documentation, I already know what my prior year retained earnings is, because like it is what it is, right? The only number I don't know is current year income. That means if I can validate all of my assets and liabilities, all of my balance sheet accounts, then my current year income is going to be 100% correct. Now, at that point, I might have some reclasses to do among P&L accounts, but I know what my bottom line number is. So that's why every single month I emphasize that all of our clients should be doing a full balance sheet close with supporting documentation. And that supporting documentation should be uploaded to SharePoint or in binders if you're doing it the old-fashioned way or whatever, so that you can support your balances. So you'll do that. The next thing you'll do is run month-end routines. So you need to age your accounts receivable. You need to run paid transaction removal in sales module. You need to remove completed POs routine, run that routine in purchasing, and then run reconciles on every module. This is just a good time to clean up all of your data. Now, at the last thing that you should do, again, for data cleanup, is run check links on everything. Now, if you are on GP on Azure in our cloud solution, we'll do that for you, and it's free. You don't get charged for running check links at year-end close. But what you'll do is you have to have, if you don't have our solution, you must have system level security. All the users have to be logged out, and then you'll run it. But if you want us to run it for you, we could do that. And the main thing to remember is to always back up before running check links. You know what? I just realized, shoot, I at the beginning of this, I said that check links, that we don't charge for check links, but don't quote me on that because I might be wrong. We don't charge for year-end close, but actually I think we do charge for check links. And the reason is because check links can be a very time-consuming process for our consultants, and also has to be done at night and on the weekends. So it's one of those things that we can't just do for free because it's a fairly complex thing. And also it's dependent on the size of the company, what needs to be done. So anyway, check with your consultant on that ahead of time and they'll let you know. Next thing you'll want to do is close all your fiscal periods, and most of you know how to do that. You'll do that to keep people from accidentally posting to the wrong year. Let's see, now what you're going to do when you close your year, you're going to do things in the following following order: payroll, inventory, receivables, payables, fixed assets, analytical accounting, project accounting, and finally general ledger. The one I have listed optional for payroll is optional, is that can be done anytime, closing that module. However, mechanically, most people end up doing it first because it's payroll and it's the first thing that happens at the beginning of the new year. So other best practices, you're going to get instructions from us on year-end closing procedures. And you'll have a whole bunch of times in there where it says to run backups. And actually, if you were to download Microsoft's instructions, you'd see backups running constantly. Like you'd have like, I don't even know, 20 or 30 backups you'd have to run during month-end close if you follow their instructions. But the truth is that really the only purpose of running backups during year-end close is to make sure that, you know, if you have to revert for some reason, that you can actually do it without, you know, wasting a whole bunch of time. So for most of our clients, closing AP, closing inventory, closing, you know, GL, closing each of those are actually pretty quick processes, maybe 2 to 5 minutes. Sometimes if you have tons and tons of data, it can take much longer than that. But for most of our clients, most of those modules are fairly quick. So you only run a backup if you're looking at it going, this is going to take so long that if something happens, crashes and burns during close, that I can't get back to it without rerunning hours of work, then I do a backup. Next thing is print reports at your own peril. There's like all these reports, especially for AR and AP, that are just friggin' massive, right? They're like thousands of pages long for many of our clients. And it's not gonna do anything for you because the data is all in there and fully backed up. So my recommendation on those is hit cancel and don't print those reports. The one you absolutely have to have though is the GL closing report, because that's gonna show all of the expense accounts and, you know, all the P&L accounts that close to retained earnings, and you do need that for history. One trick is to change your system date to 12/31/2021 when you perform each of the closing procedures, because it's just confusing for people otherwise. Because like, let's say you close on January 8th, right? And you don't change your system date. When you go pull up the window afterwards, it says, when did you last close? It's gonna say January 8th. They're gonna be like, wait, I closed as of 12/31. So if you change your system to 12/31, it makes it a lot easier. A lot less confusing. So let's walk through each of the modules and what has to happen in the year-end closing procedures for each of the modules. So payroll. Payroll has a very clear path you have to follow in order to get everything closed, right? First thing, apply the year-end update. I talked about that earlier. If you have the payroll module, you should apply the year-end update as soon as possible. Email support@savannas.com to schedule those year-end updates. Otherwise, you will receive an email from our team within the next week to go ahead and do that scheduling as well. But that's really important. And the year-end update can be applied anytime right now. It doesn't have to wait till year-end. You can just do it now. It's not going to hurt any of your final payrolls. Secondly, run your final check run for 2021. When that's done, immediately create the year-end wage file. You don't actually have to print the W-2s, but you're going to create the year-end wage file and generate the W-2s. So all that data is in there. Then what you'll do is apply the year-end tax update. And this one is the one that's time sensitive. That year-end tax update updates all the tax rates for the new year. So it's very important to be applied after your last 2021 check run and before your first 2022 check run. So then what you do is your first 2022 check run, and then you'll run all your monthly and quarterly reports. Make sure when you run those reports, your system date is 12/31/2021, because then it'll give you Q4 reports. And finally, print your W-2s when you're ready to do that. Again, this is in our year-end closing procedures information that we provide as well. Inventory. You should reconcile inventory quantities before you close. You should perform a physical count if it's required. Then I recommend that you check the box to remove discontinued items. And the main thing to remember when you're closing inventory is there aren't going to be any reports to print. So it's like really freaking weird. Like you click close and you just look at it and nothing happens. And you're like, am I done? And then you close the window and it's over. So it's really strange. So just don't be freaked out by that. Receivables. Run a reconcile on accounts receivable before you close. Also make sure you perform the paid transaction removal utility so that you close all your open AR transactions to history. And then the last thing is don't print the closing report because it's massive and you're not going to do anything with it anyway. So just hit cancel on that. Next one is payables. One of the important thing is don't post any AP transactions until after you close, because that will make all your queries correct, as we discussed earlier. Fiscal year companies need to do an AP close at 12/31, even if you're not closing the fiscal year. So just make sure you do that. And the reason you're doing that is so that you can produce 1099s. Another thing to remember is 1099s can be edited, and the 1099 feature in GP actually works extremely well. So if you're not using it, I recommend you go ahead and start using it, because very simple, easy to use, free, it's included with the system, why not? And then the last step after you've closed both AP and AR is to close the tax year. So fixed assets. Very important to note, fixed assets close is mandatory. You must do it before you run depreciation in 2022. Can't emphasize that enough, because literally if you accidentally miss on this, there's like no way to undo it. And we did have a client, it's been years now, but they actually didn't close fixed assets, and then they started remembering it like in July, and it was like there was like nothing we could do. We couldn't backtrack it. So just so you know that. Also make sure payables is closed before you close fixed assets, because then you'll make sure that anything open in AP that should have been transferred to fixed assets is transferred. And make sure you print all your reports prior to close. There are no specified year-end procedures if you have project accounting. However, project accounting module in GP is notorious for getting data issues. So I always recommend full project accounting reconciles every single month end, and you run it over and over and over until you get no errors. If you do that and you run check links as well, you will have so many fewer issues with project accounting. In fact, if you are a very heavy project accounting user, I recommend full reconciles and check links every single month end. And if you do that, you will have so many fewer data issues of things that just don't seem right, that or don't calculate properly on revenue recognition. It'll just take care of a lot of issues for you. Definitely run project accounting check links before you close though. It's just a good practice. You don't have to, but if you do it, then you at least once a year, you know you've got it fully done. And the other trick with that check links for project accounting is you have to run it over and over and over and over till it comes back clean. On the GL side, important, this is actually the #1 support case that Microsoft gets for GP clients at year end. They get it over and over and over. Probably the #1 thing that we have as well is that you have to have the correct posting type. You know how when you go and set up a new account in GP, how you have to select the posting type? Is it balance sheet or income statement, right? That is super important, because that balance sheet, that income statement, when it says income statement, tells the system which accounts should be closing to retained earnings. So what does that mean? If I have a balance sheet account that I accidentally put income statement on and I run year-end close, that thing is going to close to retained earnings, and your balance sheet, I mean, it's just going to be wrong, right? So it's really important that you go into Smart List and print an account list, or actually pull up a Smart List and scroll through it and make sure that all the balance sheet accounts are balance sheet properly allocated and all the P&L are properly set up as income statement accounts. If, for example, you actually make a mistake on that, though, I'll hit that on the FAQs, it is possible to undo it. So it's like not the end of the world, but just try to save yourself the pain. Okay, so what happens when we do a GL close? All the P&L accounts close to retained earnings. The balance sheet accounts roll forward. So that's why it's so important to do the GL close immediately after year end and not wait till audit. Because otherwise, if you're going and pulling up your balance sheet account, let's say you're pulling up a prepaid account, it's only going to show the activity for 2022. It's not going to roll forward the beginning balance from 2021. So, and that also helps with Management Reporter, because it'll roll forward all your financials too and create the correct balance sheet accounts for Management Reporter as well. After completing your close, if you're on-prem, you should run SQL Database Maintenance after each year end. For our existing GP customers that are on GP on Azure, we actually do that for you, so you don't have to worry. We do periodic database management for you all the time. So, frequently asked questions. Let's go through some of those. So these are ones that happen every year. Why don't some of my vendor payments show up on the 1099? So this one is a really common one. So story is, got an AP clerk, they're setting up vendors. They're the person who's in charge of setting up vendors. In January, somebody says, oh, set up this vendor, and they go ahead and set them up. Then they pay them a couple times. And then all of a sudden they look at it and go, geez, these guys should have been a 1099 vendor. And then they go ahead and mark it as a 1099 vendor in March. When you run the 1099s at the end of the year, it's only going to show what was marked from March through December. It's not going to include the payments for January and February. So then, but you can actually go in and manually adjust the 1099 to include January and February. But also this is a positive, and this is also the case for those of you who eventually go to Business Central, which is that you actually control which payments are designated as 1099 payments and which ones are not. So this is actually a good thing that it works this way, because some of our clients actually have vendors that at times are 1099 vendors during the year, but for other payments are not 1099 payments. And so what they'll do is they'll manually go in and turn it on and off as required in order to actually get the 1099 payments correct. So what if I want to issue a check on January 1st, but I haven't closed AP for 2021 yet? That's also a common question we get. Remember, you can print checks, but not post them. Go ahead, print whatever you got to do, but just don't post the actual check payment until after you finish the close. So yeah, you'll have a couple of batches or a few batches sitting out there of check runs that you've done, but then as soon as AP close is done, then you can go ahead and run it and post it. This is a common one. I ran payroll year-end close, and I go to print my 941 and it's all zeros. Super confusing. Okay, when you're running your 941 report, what Microsoft has this built as is the 941, the system date, your system date is what tells which quarter you're in, right? So if, or which year you're in, I should say. Quarters aren't a problem, but years are. Tells which year you're in. So if I have a January 15th date on my system, January 15th, 2022, it's going to go, oh, this is 2022 year, and it's going to run this for 2022. But if I change my system date to 12/31, this is a typo in here, 2021. If I change my system date to 12/31, 2021, the report, it will run properly. So when I try to close the GL, I get an error, says that a single-use batch or quick journal has not been posted. Happens all the time. Happens probably 90% of the time, maybe 95. So this is just, the system is going to close if you ignore the error. But it really is kind of a good control, because the truth is, if I have a batch that has transactions with 2021 date, they should be posted before year end, right? So if it's not supposed to be posted in 2021, I should go into each of those transactions and update to them to have a 2022 date. Same thing with quick journal entries and change those to 2022 dates. Because really, I'm not posting them in 2021 or I wouldn't be closing the year right now. So as a general procedure, it is best to update everything, make it right, and then go ahead and do the close. Does everyone need to be on GP when I do the close? Yes, they do. And I say we recommend that you do it when everyone's out, but actually Microsoft also recommends that. So yes, you should get everybody out when you're doing it. Now, this is a big one. I close the year. Can I undo it or reopen it? Yes, you can, and it's actually super easy to do now. So our clients, pretty much everyone is beyond GP 2013 at this point. So in 2013, Microsoft actually added an enhancement to GP that allows you to reverse historical year. And we've done it many times. And just so you know, it's kind of scary because you're like, reverse historical year, but it actually works great. So all it's going to happen is just going to reverse everything out and reopen it as if it was never closed in the first place. Works great. common way that's used is like I described, where you might have a P&L account that got designated as balance sheet or vice versa. If I go ahead and reverse it afterwards, fix the accounts, boom, I can make it work. And the last, I think this may be my last question. Can Savannas help me with close? Yes. As I mentioned at the beginning, most of our clients have us walk them through close on a remote session because it's like just way less stressful. And you know, we send this document that's just massive. Oh, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do. And it's like, it's going to take you so long to read the thing and be so stressful to go through it that if we just help you do it, a couple hours later or an hour or two later, you're done and no worries. So if you want to do that, email support@savannas.com and they will have someone who's on your account help you through it. So that's it. I'm up to Q&A and I think we'll open it up for questions. Drew, are you still available that we can see how we want to approach that?
Yeah, definitely. So right now, we currently don't have any questions. If you do have a question for Janelle, just pop it in the questions tab of the GoToWebinar meeting, and we'll make sure that Janelle addresses it. So we'll hang on here for, a couple minutes and wait to see if any questions come in.
Gosh, I always get questions from somebody. This will be my first year ever if I don't.
So we did just get a question asking when we will be sending out the documentation. So you'll receive an email from GoToWebinar with the recording, so the video recording of this session, and then within the next 2 days here, you'll receive an email from us with a link to the recording and a link to all the documentation that includes the slide deck as well. So within the next couple days here, so sometime this week, you'll receive that email from us.
Great. Looks like we're not going to get anything. That means this year end's going to be super easy for all of us, right? For us, we always get the panic questions when someone has something goes wrong. So if nobody has any questions and we have no panic clients this year, it will be awesome. We'll all be happy.
All right. Well, yep, we still don't have any questions, so I think we can go ahead and end it here. Thanks everyone for joining us, and look out for those emails from us later this week. Thanks. Have a good day.
Take care, everyone.